Okay, so we're kind of just like reviewing chapter 8 today. It's been a while since I was here in person this week, got sort of scrambled. So just by way of review, 4 lessons ago, we learned about how to solve quadratic equations. So what made an equation be a quadratic equation?
Equals 0.
We like them to equal 0 most of the time.
X.
Yeah, they had x squareds in them. They probably also had an x, but maybe not always. And they probably had a number, but not always. We more often like those to equal 0. The first section, we solved this using stuff from Algebra 1. We generally got it equal to 0, and then we tried to...
What?
Different F word. Factor. We try to factor. We make those parentheses. So we did a homework on page 351. A few people did those, a few people didn't. If you still have a page 351, if you could, make sure your name is on there. Make sure you label it a 351. Send that down. I'm not really looking to talk about that today because we already talked about that in pretty good detail 3 days ago of school. 3 days of school ago, we also learned a new thing that we've never looked at since then, because I haven't been here, that if you can't factor, we get the equation equals 0, we can't factor, there's a thing that lets us solve these anyway. What was that thing called?
Quadratic equation.
Quadratic formula is correct. So for the quadratic formula, the number with the x squared was given the name A. The number with the x is given the name B. The other number was given the name C. And we like that to equal 0. And if you go to try to solve that for x, the x is equal to a pretty big, scary looking formula. Can anybody give me some or all of that?
B minus
Negative.
Negative b plus minus square root
B squared minus 4ac over 2a.
all over 2a. So by the time the test comes in like 2 days, if you know that, we're going to be in pretty good shape. If you don't know that, it's going to wreck a lot of questions. Okay, but that was the formula that we used to try to solve these. What if you didn't see this there? What would the b be? 0. What if you didn't see this?
0.
C would be 0. If you didn't see this, it wouldn't belong in this chapter, because this chapter is only doing things that have the x squareds in them. So the A is always there. But B is maybe a 0 sometimes, C is a 0 sometimes. But we were trying to run this formula and go after stuff here on page 355. I don't have anybody's page 355 because I wasn't here. So hopefully you did a page 355, and let me just rattle off a few answers here to illustrate the point. 1 doesn't have a fraction left. Sometimes when you get this all the way solved, you might get an answer that looks like 6 plus or minus 8 root 7 over 2. Why is that not the best answer to stick with forever?
Because you can reduce it
We
by
can
2.
reduce by 2 with which numbers?
2, 8, 6, and 8.
2, 6, and 8. If we can hit all of these numbers and divide them all by the same number, which in this case is 2, we would do that. And sometimes the fraction stops existing. So number 1 does that. Number 1 does not have a fraction in the final result. It's negative 3 plus or minus root 5. We skipped 3's on this probably. Does that sound right? Okay. So let me go down to number 5. 5 factors. So it would be 3 and it would be negative 10. Does anybody have a memory? What happens to the formula if it was factorable and you don't notice and you do the formula anyway? What happens to it?
You're just going to get the answer.
You have a square root you can do. You get something like the square root of, for example, 25. The square root of 25 you could turn into 5. And then maybe your answer will be like 6 plus 5 is 11 over 2. 6 minus 5 would be 1 over 2. You can pull that apart and make a couple answers out of it that way. Flashing down to 11. 11, if you square root a negative, what did we have to do starting in chapter 7 when you square root a negative? Get some i's. So 11 is going to go 1 plus or minus I root 3, all on the top, a 2. sometimes with the root, you can't do anything with it. I don't see any that were like, oh no, we skipped 21. I don't think there were any that the root just got stuck, but sometimes the root does just get stuck. 28 is close. 28 is -1 plus or minus an I root 23 all on top of 6. The root was sort of stuck but needed an I taken out of it on that one. But I don't really want to sit here and read answers all day, but did anybody have anything on 355 that you weren't quite sure how to do? Anything that was a little different than anybody else?
I do 13.
13, yeah, that's a good question. 13 has an issue that it's a bunch of fractions to begin with, so it doesn't look right. So what we have to do is start that one off by using an old skill. So 13 looks like this. We can't do anything with that yet because the quadratic formula is not for fractions, it's for something that looks like that. Anybody a thought on what we can do 13?
It's like rewrite with fractional exponents on the quiz. I know how to do it, I just don't know exactly what it's called.
Multiply it all by x squared.
We could try to multiply, like distribute through everything by an x squared. We pick the LCM of all the bottoms, which is x squared, and multiply everybody by that. So the 1 turns into x squared. Here we get a little bit of cancellation, but not perfect, and the 2 gets an x. Here we get cancellation that is perfect, just a 5. Now it equals 0, and now we can roll with that. What would the A be for this one? A is a 1, B is 2, C is 5, and then we just stick the numbers in the slots and do the math. 13 did that, 14 did that. Some of the later ones would have done that, but we stopped at 32, right?
Yeah.
So 33, 34 didn't get a chance to do that. Is that okay for your question? Yep. Anybody else run into anything on 355 that you weren't sure how to do it? You got answers, you want to know if they're right. Odds are in the back, you can check those there. Anybody need more guidance, 355? 19. So 19, I'd probably take a side step and not use the formula. The day before that, if we had just the square and not the variable, we got that alone. So z squared could equal anybody thought on 19? It would equal -5. Then you can undo squaring by rooting. So if you root that, rooting a negative gets you i's. Rooting 5 is stuck. And any of those ones we did the root, there's a little something extra coming. Plus or minus. It would be plus or minus I root 5. That's a quicker way to do the ones without the x. Anybody else, anything 355 that was any different or not sure? Any unsettlement on 355? Yep.
Never mind.
Never mind. Last call, 355. If you did that the whole way through, again, put your name on that one. Label it as a page 355. Send that down toward the end. Keep on the ends if you could kind of keep the file separate for me. That's helpful for my day a little bit later when I sort those, or don't have to. Question on that? Okay, so then 2 lessons ago, I wasn't here. You had to watch a video on 8.3. If you didn't watch the video yet on 8.3, watch the video on 8.3. If you did watch the video on 8.3 and you have some questions about what to do with page 360, let's try to take those on. If you didn't watch the video yet, it's not fair to ask a question like, can you just explain to me everything on the video? No, watch the video. But if you did watch the video and you have some loose ends, I'm happy to try to help bridge that gap. 360 homework. Anybody have anything that you weren't sure how to manage? Any ones that were hard? Anything you didn't like? Did you watch the video? Okay. So somebody pick out a problem or two and help that guy out other than I'm not sure where to go with how do I do all of this? I'm not sure what to do with that. Anybody have something on the first 15 that was bad? Let me read some answers and then you can decide that.
13.
Okay, yep, let me get that in a second. So 1, you should be saying there was 1 real answer. We skipped 3s on this again. 5 had 2 real answers. 7 had 1 real answer. 9 had 2, we skipped 9. 11 had 2 real answers. 13 we're about to do. 15 we skipped. So what's going on for this first 15? You're just trying to do this part of the formula and see what happens there. So for 13, what's the A?
Y2?
It's a number.
Y,
1. The A will be a 1 because it's the number with the square. What's the B on number 13?
1/2?
Not quite half.
-1.
Why negative?
Because you can switch it.
Yeah, because before you do anything, the problem has to equal
0.
0. So the B is
-1.
not -1,
-1.5.
-1/2. What's the C? Not 3/5.
-3/5.
Why -3/5?
It's imaginary percentage.
We got to get everything to equal 0. So question about A being 1, B being negative, C being negative, but keep the numbers that we have. So do B squared. B squared
1/4.
is a 4 minus 4 times A times C.
12. -12.
Yeah, it's going to be negative and some kind of fraction, and I don't even care what it is. Okay, but it is going to be negative. We have a minus, and if we multiply that stuff, it's going to be a negative. I don't care. Why don't I care?
It's going to be like a
Because
plus.
minus minus makes plus. This adding this is definitely going to be positive, and that's all we care about. We only care about what the sign is going to be for this portion of the homework. If we get a positive result, how many answers are there going to be and what type? 2 reals, and we move on. What if this is negative?
Then
2 complex, and we get out. What's the other choice other than positive, negative that you wouldn't usually get? 0 makes 1 real. But that's what's going on first 15. Just do this part of the formula, and you only have to do it enough to know if it's positive, negative, or 0. And then just do the answer from the notes. Is that okay on that? Anybody first 15, anything? Okay, starting from 16 and down, we just need to memorize 2 math trivia questions. The sum is always what in terms of A, B, C?
negative B over A.
Negative B over A. The product is always going to be C over A. So from 16 to 27, you just make those fractions by using the A's, B's, and C's. But before you can judge A's, B's, and C's again for the second or third time today, the problem has to be
0.
equal 0. If we're not equal 0, you have to do all the work necessary to make the problem equal 0. So from 16 to 27, do anything you have to make the question equal 0. And then we're just going to use these 2 trivia questions that I started teaching this lesson again. I had skipped this lesson for a couple years, but it's PSATs have been asking questions about this, so I dusted this off, so here it goes. But the sum and the product, just try to memorize those trivia answers. Anybody 16 to 27 needs some guidance. From 28 to the end, you just reverse that then. What they're giving you is the sum and the product of the answers, or maybe they're giving you a couple answers and making you figure out the sum and the product yourself. But we're trying to reverse that to get A, B, and C identified and get back to having an equation. Anybody 32 to the end have 1 or 2 or whatever that you're like, I did not like that one? Anybody stuck on anything? 28 to the end?
40?
40. So for 40, we have root 2 and we have 3 root 2. What's invisibly here that we can write?
1.
There's a 1. So what we're going to have to do is figure out the sum. Sum means add those up.
4 root 2.
4 root 2. Product means to multiply. So multiply them.
3 root 2. 3 root 4.
6. Because root 2 times root 2
Oh, 2
is 2 times 3 is 6. Question about adding and multiplying those. To judge A, B, and C, they need to look like they are fractions. And fractions that have a what? A common denominator. We need fractions with a common denominator. So if I make these fractions, I just put them over 1. And then we're ready to identify it. A would be 1. Because the A has to be the bottom of both because trivia says so. B comes from the sum, but we have to switch the sign. So negative 4 root 2. C comes from the top of the product, which is 6. So then we write an equation. Our equation has to equal 0. Next to the x squared, 1, because this says so. Next to the x, negative 4 root 2, because that says so. Plus 6, because that says so. And on we go. Did that make sense for 40?
Yeah.
You good? That's what's going on. That whole bottom group is add the answers to get a sum, multiply the answers to get a product. If they aren't fractions, put them over once. If they are fractions, make sure they have a common denominator. But once you get that done, the A is the bottom of both, the B is the top of the sum, but switch sign. C is the top of the product, write an equation, call it a day. Question about anything about page 360 that you want me to do some more stuff, explain some more stuff? You sort of said, help me with everything. Does that help you some? Some of it? Anybody else 360, last call 360s? People probably still more working on that one, I would think. Just if you're all the way done, send that on down and call that a day. Then one lesson ago was 8.4. 8.4 was using a system called substitution to try to change the way the problem looked and get some stuff solved. 8.4 video, if you watched it, I'd be happy to try to guide you through some of the 1 to 18 on this. Yep, sure. Anybody 364? Something that you got started and fizzled out a little bit? Let me read just some odd answers and see how that goes. 1, we're hoping for an 81 and a 1. 2 is a 4th and a 16. 3 was, I'm just going to read you the odds. 3 is plus or minus root 5. 5 is a negative 27, positive 8. 7 is just a 16. There might have been a negative answer you had to throw away for some reason. 9 had 4 answers, a 1, a negative 1, a 5, and a 7. 11 had 4 answers, a 1, a negative 1, a 4, and a 6. 13 is one of 2 that you had to use the quadratic formula because it wasn't factoring quite right at a phase. So 13, you're going to get plus or minus a root, and under the root is 2 plus or minus root 6. 14 does a similar thing. 14 also needs to use the quadratic formula because it didn't factor. 15 is a 3rd and a negative a half. 17 is a 2 and a negative 1. Anybody 364? That's usually not a popular lesson, so if you have no questions, that might be a bad sign on how much homework you tried to do.
Can we get a count on who did this homework, please?
Do you have something that went?
Oh, he asked for a count on how many people did that.
What a strong
I
team.
really understood
Strong team.
it.
Okay. You didn't do it yet?
I did do it.
You did it. So it looks like 3 people then I think did it.
I
You
did
did
it
it?
too.
I didn't do it. I wasn't
Whoa.
there.
I understand.
It sounded like we had kind of a wipeout on Friday, that
Big time.
It was
basketball
literally-
people were gone and then the people that weren't on basketball
Just scared.
decided to
It was
also
You
take.
go.
Then maybe why
Melissa,
I understood
I didn't live up to my alarm.
it. Less
I
people
guess
being
they
there.
I don't
Miss
live up to my
Walters.
alarms.
Did you have anything you needed?
guys did
Woke
it.
up at
No,
8:30.
I actually like weirdly understood.
Did it work?
Like
Did
I
it-
watched
yours
it,
work?
so it
Yeah.
kind of clicked.
Still did?
You've been checking the odds in the
Yeah.
back.
That's so bad.
Okay.
It's alright.
So where we go from here is catch up. If you didn't watch the videos yet, I guess that's your first attempt at a step, is watch those videos and get the stuff figured out. 8.4, the practice test from 8.1 to 8.4, the chapter 8 practice test is due tomorrow. I gave you that last week, so that's with you somewhere. I have one for you because you weren't here.
Dang. Dang.
There's not that
Did you have anything you needed from that page?
Yeah.
Because you're one of like 3 people that did the homework, and I think some of the other people would be happy if anyone asked a question. These 2 said they were okay-ish. 15. So here's the idea, whether you watched the video or didn't watch the video, tune it in. Here's a video preview if you didn't. There's a thing in math called substitution. Okay, you use substitution if you ever have a problem that you're just kind of thinking, I don't like how that looks, I want to make this look differently. You don't like how this looks, you don't like seeing negative exponents, I'm sure. Okay, so what the official letter of substitution has always been the letter U. I don't know who decided that or when, but letter U is the letter of substitution. In this homework, what you're always going to do is focus on the middle portion of the problem and just write down that U equals that. Just trust me, it's just the way that that's going to go. The 0 and the equals are going to sit, the 6 is going to sit, the minus is going to sit, and instead of this being a messy thing you don't like, we just gave it a new name. We just decided to call it U. Keep the minus, keep any other numbers we saw, but there weren't any. And then this beginning part, we need to express that in terms of the U. And somebody that did any of these, that is just going to be U squared. This whole homework page, they set these up so that this is the square of that. So if you just call this U, this is always going to be called U squared. And all of a sudden, if you make that little switcheroo, you should have a comfortable problem to do. Okay, but that's the gist of this. Call the middle thing U. Because they're kind, the first part is always going to be called U squared, and you should feel decent about that. That's what made that new. Then it gets easy through the middle, but then there's a twist at the end. Question about the switcheroo at the beginning? What can we do with this?
Factor.
Factor. There's 2 that can't factor. So if you can't factor, you get stuck with
The one thing.
the, what's it called?
Quadratic formula.
The quadratic formula. We're stuck doing this twice. So on number 13 and 14, you're going to have to use this instead of factoring. That's just the way that goes. But here we can factor U, plus minus,
Plus 2 minus
2.
plus 2 minus 3. This tells you that U would be
-2.
-2. This tells you that U would be
3.
3. In this zone, you probably felt pretty comfortable, I would hope. Question about the comfort zone? And then here's the twist at the end. Our job at the beginning wasn't to figure out U. We invented that. That wasn't even there. What was our job at the beginning?
to solve
Solve for X. So what we're going to do is take, if U equals this thing, and right here U equaled some other thing, transitive property kind of in effect, these 2 things should equal each other. So we're going to go x to the -1 equals this answer. We're also going to need to do x to the -1 equals the 3. Whatever you picked as your U, it's going to equal whatever answers that you have. Does anybody remember what x to the negative 1 meant?
1 over x.
It is 1 over x. So alternative identity, maybe people are more comfortable with that. We don't want to know 1 over x, we want to know x. So how can we get this opposited? We could multiply by x, there's a simpler way to go. What's the quickest path to get to x from where we are? Just flip it. Just flip it. 1 over x, flip, is x. And in algebra, whatever you do to one side,
You gotta do
you do to the other. So if we flip this, we have to flip that. It's a negative half. And this, if we flip that,
A third.
it's a third. You okay in 15? Question any of that? Okay, here's what some of the other problems might have done. This might have been x squared. And then you follow the exact same kind of process. But if you got to the end and it was instead x squared equals stuff, you would have to do some roots. If you rooted negatives, there's i's, you root 3, it's just root 3. If you're doing roots, what else comes in all the time? Plus minus. Maybe some other problems. This is root x. If we had root x, to undo rooting at the end, you'd have to square. Squaring this would be 9, but this would be a throwaway. Why would this one be a throwaway? A radical sign can't equal a negative. I know for sure one of these other problems had something like x to the 1/3. What does x to the 1/3 mean? It is a cube root. So if you get to the end and it's a cube root, how do you undo cube roots? You cube it. I think there's somewhere the u was something like x squared plus x. So if you got x squared plus x equals negative 2, how would you solve that? Make it equal to 0 and hope you can factor. What the u is different every problem. So the end is like a little different every problem, but the comfort zone should be the same every problem. Okay? Pick u to be the middle. U squared will always be the beginning. That'll let you rename the problem to be comfort zone. Hopefully you factor, but then you're going to have to do a little bit of wiggling at the end somehow. Anybody else, anything on 364 I can do to help your life toward betterness? So if you did that whole thing, 364, label it, put your name on it, send that down. Again, tomorrow the priority is the Chapter 8 practice test. Chapter 8 practice test tomorrow, which puts the Chapter 8 test 2 days into the future, and then we're into Chapter 9. If you're down, make it a catch-up night, I guess, because clock is ticking.